Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, friends. I know that there's a lot of people that really don't have time to read, and they've told me so. And so I thought maybe I would do my own version of Tom Munn's story time. And today I'd like to be able to discuss or read a book by one of our speakers coming about the Agenda 21 conference, Tom Dewey. It's called Special Report Agenda 21. This is going to be part one of however many parts there are. And so I thought that you could just listen to what he's got to say. Sustainable Development, A Transformation of America by Tom Dewey. Some think that the planet is in danger of global warming and overconsumption. They really believe that the only way to fix the problem is to control the flow of resources and wealth, which literally means changing civilization as we live. The problem is that requires a forced transition or transformation of an entire society to comply, and ultimately leads to a thirst for power and top-down control that will eventually lead to tyranny, if we're not there already. In his book, Earth in the Balance, Al Gore warned that a wrenching transformation must take place to lead America away from the horrors of the Industrial Revolution. The process to do that is called sustainable development, and its roots can be tracked back to the UN policy document called Agenda 21, adopted at the UN's Earth Summit in 1992. Sustainable development calls for a changing of the very infrastructure of this nation away from private ownership and the control of property to nothing short of central planning for the entire economy, often referred to as top-down control. So where and when did the term sustainable development originate? The term sustainable development was born on the pages of Our Common Future, an official report of 1987 United Nations World Commission on Environmental Development, authored by Gro Harlem Brundtland, Vice President of the World Socialist Party. For the first time, the environment was tied and tried and true to socialist goals of international redistribution of wealth. Said the report, poverty is a major cause of the effect of global environmental problems. It is therefore futile to attempt to deal with environmental problems without a broader perspective that encompasses the factors underlying world poverty and international equality, end quote. The term appeared in full force in 1992 in the United Nations initiative called the UN Sustainable Development Agenda 21, or as it has been known around the world simply Agenda 21. It was unveiled at the 1992 United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, UNCED, ballyhooed as the Earth Summit. In fact, the Earth Summit was one of the provisions called for in the Brundtland Report that the means of implementing sustainable development around the world. More than 178 nations adopted Agenda 21 as official policy. George H.W. Bush was the signatory for the United States. So what is sustainable development? In 1989, Webster's Dictionary defines sustainable yield as a requirement that trees cut down in a forest area be replaced with new plantings to ensure future lumber supplies. That's what most people think sustainable development means. Proponents of sustainable development argue that it is about preserving resources for future generations. What's wrong with that? Nothing in theory. That would be sustainable with a small s, just common sense usage of natural resources. The problem is major forces now promoting it intend for sustainable development to be spelled with a capital S. They intend for a socio-economic political movement that probes, invades, and changes every aspect of human civilization. And that's the problem. To change every aspect of human civilization. Imagine in America in which a specific ruling principle is created to decide proper societal conduct for every citizen. That principle would be used to consider regulations guiding everything you eat, the kind of home you're allowed to live in, the method of transportation you use to get to work, what kind of work you may have, and the way you dispose of your waste, perhaps even the number of children you may have, as well as the quality amount of education for your children may receive. Sustainable development encompasses every aspect of our lives. According to its authors, the objective of sustainable development is to integrate economic, social, and environmental policies in order to achieve reduced consumption, social equality, and the preservation and restoration of biodiversity. The top 10 sustainable fallacies. Sustainability is about protecting the environment. Well, in reality, it's a political movement to replace capitalism with government control of everything, a socialist program. Free market capitalism is the principal cause of planetary degradation and is not sustainable. Reality, it is government-centric control of the economy that is not sustainable. Private property is the source of social injustice and too valuable to be subject to free markets. In reality, the right to own and use private property is a fundamental source of wealth creation. Green energy creates jobs. Reality, green energy is unreliable, uncompetitive, and renders industry unable to compete in world markets. CO2 is a pollutant. Reality, CO2 is the air that all plants and crops breathe. The more CO2, the better the agricultural production. The sustainability movement isn't trying to take away anyone's property rights or freedoms. Reality, the sustainable movement is relentlessly attacking property rights and freedoms. Climate change is catastrophic and anthropogenic, man-made, and must be addressed through CO2 abatement schemes. Reality, it is not catastrophic, and as a practical matter, CO2 reductions will not work. You see no claims even of 1/1000th a degree of improvement. Washout time in less than 100 years. Compact development reduces pollution. Reality, dense development is always correlated with more intense pollution levels. Subways and mass transits can replace cars. Reality, they can't. If they could, there'd be no cars in Manhattan. Compact urban development is more affordable for government. Reality, empirical evidence proves compact development requires high tax rates. Urbanization strains police, fire, education, and social services. Affordable housing for people of all income levels will ensure healthier, better balanced neighborhoods. Reality, low income and Section 8 housing usually creates more problems than they solve, thereby damaging communities. The sustainabilists insist that society be transformed into a feudal-like governance by making nature the central organization principle for our economy and society, not human needs or wants. This idea essentially elevates nature above man. As such, every societal decision would first be questioned as to how it might affect the environment. To achieve this, sustainabilist policy focuses on three components: land use, education, and population control and reduction. Population reduction. Here's the direct quote from the report of the 1976 UN's Habitat 1 conference, which said, "Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to the pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument in the accumulation and concentration of wealth, therefore contributes to social injustice." Some officials claim that sustainable development is just a local effort of protecting the environment and contained development, just your local leaders putting together a local vision for your community. Yet, the exact language and tactics for implementation of sustainable development are being used in nearly every city around the globe, from Lewiston to Maine to Singapore. Local indeed. In short, sustainable development is the process by which America is being reorganized around a central principle of state collectivism, using the environment as bait. One of the best ways to understand what sustainable development actually is can be found by discovering what is not sustainable. According to the UN's Biodiversity Assessment Report, items for the everyday lives are not sustainable, including ski runs, grazing of livestock, plowing of soil, building fences, industry, single-family homes, paved and tarred roads, logging activities, dams, reservoirs, power line construction, and economic systems that fail to set proper value on the environment. In other words, capitalism and free markets. Maurice Strong, Secretary General of the UN's Rio Earth Summit in 1992 said, and I quote, "Current lifestyles and consumption patterns of the affluent middle class involving high meat intake, use of fossil fuels, appliances, home and work, air conditioning, and suburban housing are not sustainable." End quote. This goal is exactly the policies that are written into such legislation as Cap and Trade, the Clean Air Act, and the Clean Water Act. It is also the policy behind many corporate commercials seen nightly on television with Advocate going green. They are all part of the efforts to modify the American consumer's behavior to accept less, deal with higher energy prices, restrict water use, and place severe limitations on the use of private property, all under the environmental excuse. And one of the most destructive tools used to enforce sustainable development policy is something called the precautionary principle. This means that any activity that might threaten human health or the environment should be stopped, even if there is no clear cause and effect relationship has been established, and even if the potential threat is largely theoretical. This makes it easy for any activist group to issue concerns or warnings by press release or questionable report against the industry or private activity, and have these warnings quickly turned into public policy, just in case. Many are now finding non-elected regional governments and governing councils enforcing policy and regulations outside of law. As these policies are implemented locally, elected officials are actually losing their own power and decision-making ability in their elected offices. More and more decisions are now being made behind the scenes in non-elected sustainability councils armed with truckloads of federal regulations, guidelines, and grant money. The 3 E's are environmentally sound, economically feasible, and socially equitable. According to its authors, the objective of sustainable development is to integrate economic, social, and environmental policies in order to achieve reduced consumption, social equality, and the preservation and restoration of biodiversity. The Sustainable Development logo used in the most literature on the subject contains 3 connecting circles labeled social equality, economic prosperity, and ecological integrity, known commonly as the 3 E's. So we'll talk about social equality. Sustainable Development's social equality plank is based on the demand for social justice. Social justice is described as the right and opportunity of all people to benefit equally from the resources afforded to us by society and the environment. According to sustainablist doctrine, it is social justice for some to have prosperity if others do not. It is the social injustice to keep our borders closed. It is social injustice for some to be bosses and others to be merely workers. Social justice is a major premise of sustainable development. Another word for social justice is socialism or Marxism. Karl Marx was the first to coin the phrase social justice. Most recently, the theory of social justice has been used to justify government takeover of healthcare. Today, the phrase is used throughout the sustainablist literature. The sustainablist system is based on the principle that individuals must give up selfish wants for the needs of the common good, or the community, or communism. This is the same policy behind the push to eliminate our nation's border to allow the migration of those from other nations into the United States to share our individually created wealth and our taxpayer-paid government social programs. Say the sustainabilists, justice and efficiency go in hand. Borders, they say, are unjust. Under the sustainablist system, private property is an evil that is used simply to create wealth for just a few. So too is business ownership. Instead, every worker person will be a direct capital owner. Property and businesses are to be kept in the name of the owner, keeping them responsible for taxes and other expenses. However, control is in the hands of the community or the government. Under sustainable development, individual human wants, needs, and desires are to be conformed to the views and dictates of social planners, not you. Harvey Rubin, Vice Chair of the International Council on Local Environmental Initiatives, or ICLEI, said individual rights will have to take a backseat to the collective in the process of implementing sustainable development. So we move on to economic prosperity. Sustainable development's economic policy is based on the overriding premise that the wealth of the world was made at the expense of the poor. It dictates that if conditions of the poor are to be improved, wealth must be first taken from the rich. Consequently, sustainable development's economic policy is based not on private enterprise, but on public-private partnerships. In America's free market of the past, most businesses were started by individuals who saw a need for a product or service and they set out to fill it. Some businesses prospered and became huge corporations. Some remained small mom-and-pop shops. Others failed and dissolved. Most business owners were happy to be left alone and take their chances to run their business on their own, not encumbered by a multiplicity of government regulations. If they failed, most found a way to try again. In the beginning of the American Republic, government's main involvement was to guarantee that these people had the opportunity to try. In order to give themselves an advantage over competition, some businesses, particularly large corporations, now find a great advantage in dealing directly with government, actively lobbying for legislation that will inundate smaller companies with regulations that they cannot possibly comply with or even keep up with. This government, big corporation, back-scratching has always been a dangerous practice because economic power should be a positive check on government power, and vice versa. If the two should ever become combined, control of such massive power can lead only to tyranny. One of the best examples of this was the Italian model in the first half of the 20th century under Mussolini's fascism. Together, select business leaders who have agreed to help government impose sustainabilist green positions in the business policies and officials at all levels of government are indeed merging the power of the economy with the force of government in public-private partnerships on the local, state, and federal levels. As a result, sustainable development policy is redefined free trade to mean centralized global trade, freely crossed, or eliminating national borders. It definitely does not mean people and companies trading freely with each other. Its real effect is to redistribute American manufacturing, wealth, and jobs out of our borders to lock away American natural resources. After the regulations have been put in place, literally destroying whole industries, new green industries, created with federal grants, bringing newfound wealth to the partners. This is what sustainabilists refer to as economic prosperity. Sustainable development partnerships include some corporations both domestic and multi-nation. They in turn are partnered with politicians who use their legislative and administrative powers to raid the Treasury to fund the enforce the scheme. Of course, as the chosen corporations, which become a new elite, stamp out the need for competition through government power, the real loser is the consumers who no longer count in market decisions. Government grants are now being used by industry to create mandated green products like wind and solar. Products are put on the market at little risk to the industry, leaving consumers a more limited selection from which to choose. True free markets are eliminated in favor of controlled economies which dictate the availability and quality of products. Third, ecological integrity. Nature has an integral set of different values, cultural, spiritual, and material. Where humans are one strand in nature's web and all living things are considered equal. Therefore, the nature's way is the right way, and human activities should be molded along nature's rhythms. That quote taken from the UN's Biodiversity Treaty presented in 1992 UN Earth Summit. This quote lays down the ground rules for the entire Sustainable Development Agenda. It says humans are nothing special, just one strand in the nature of things, or put another way, Humans are simply biological resources. Sustainabilist policy is to oversee any issue which man interacts with nature, which, of course, is literally everything. And because the environment always comes first, there must be greater restrictions over private property, ownership, and control. This is necessary, sustainabilists say, because humans only defile nature. Under sustainable development, there can be no concern over individual rights. Individual human wants, needs, and desires are conformed to the views of the dictates of social planners. The UN's Commission on Global Governance said in its 1995 report, human activity combined with unprecedented increases in human numbers are impinging on the planet's basic life support system. Action must be taken now to control the human activities that produce these risks. Under sustainable development, limited government, as advocated by our founding fathers, is impossible because we are told the real or perceived environmental crisis is too great. Only government can be trusted to respond, Maurice Strong, chairman of the 1992 UN Earth Summit, said. A shift is necessary toward lifestyles less geared to environmentally damaging consumption patterns. The shift will require a vast strengthening of the multilateral system, including the United Nations. The policy based on environmental movement provides sustainabilists camouflage as they work to transform American systems of government like justice and economics. It is a masterful mixture of socialism, which is top-down control of the tools of the economy, and fascism, where property is owned in the name only with no individual owner control. Sustainable development is the worst of both the left and the right. It is not liberal nor conservative. It is a new kind of tyranny that, if not stopped, will surely lead us to the dark ages, the new dark ages of pain and misery, yet unknown to mankind. The UN report Habitat 1 Conference, and I quote, "Land cannot be treated as an ordinary asset, controlled by individuals and subject to pressures and inefficiencies of the market. Private land ownership is also a principal instrument of accumulation and concentration for wealth. Therefore, it contributes to social injustice." The reinvention of government. 6 months after his inauguration, President Bill Clinton issued Executive Order 12852, which created the President's Council on Sustainable Development, or PCSD, on June 29, 1993. The Council's membership included 12 cabinet-level federal officials. Jonathan Lash, President, World Resources Institute. John Adams, Executive Director for National Resources Defense Council. Diane Dillon Ridgely, President of Zero Population. Michelle Perrault, International Vice President, Sierra Club. John C. Sawhill, President, the Nature Conservancy. J.D. Hare, President, World Conservation Union, IUCN. Kenneth L. Lay, CEO, Enon Corporation. And William D. Ruckelhaus, Chairman, Browning Ferris Industries and former EPA Administrator. Some of these members were representatives of the same groups which helped write Agenda 21 at the UN level, now openly serving on the President's Council to create policy for the implementation of sustainable development at the federal level. With great fanfare, the Council issued a comprehensive report containing all of the guidelines on how our government was to be reinvented under sustainable development. Those guidelines were created to direct policy for every single federal, state, and local agency. Their purpose was to translate the recommendations set forth in Agenda 21 into public policy administered by the federal government. They created the American version of Agenda 21 called Sustainable America, a New Consensus. A 4-part process leading to sustainable development. So how is this wrenching transformation being put in place? There are 4 specific routes being used. In the rural areas, it's called Wildlands Project. In the cities, it's called Smart Growth. In business, it's called public-private partnerships, and in government, it's called stakeholder councils. The Wildlands Project. We must make this place an insecure and inhospitable place for capitalists and their projects. We must reclaim the roads and plowed lands, halt dam construction, tear down existing dams, free shackled rivers, and return to wilderness millions of tens of millions of acres of presently settled land. That was a quote by Dave Foreman, Earth First. The Wildlands Project was the brainchild of Earth First's Dave Foreman, and it literally calls for the rewilding of 50% of all the land in every state back to the way it was before Christopher Columbus set foot on this land. It is a diabolical plan to herd humans off the rural lands and into human settlements. Crazy, you say? Yes. Impossible? Not so fast. From Foreman, the plan became the blueprint for the UN's Biodiversity Treaty and quickly became international in scope. But how do you remove people from land? One step at a time. Let's begin with the Biosphere Reserve. A national park will do. A huge place where there's no human activity. For example, Yellowstone National Park, devoid of human habitation, can serve as its center. Then a buffer zone is established around the reserve. Inside the buffer zone, only limited human activity is allowed. Slowly, through strict regulations, the area is squeezed until human activity becomes impossible. Once that is accomplished, the biosphere is extended to the former buffer zone, and then a new buffer zone is created around the now larger biosphere, and its process starts again. In that way, the Biosphere Reserve acts like a cancer cell, ever expanding until all human activity is stopped. And there are many tools in place to stop human activity and grow the reserve. Push back livestock's access to riverbanks on the ranches, many times as much as 300. When the cattle can't reach the stream, the ranchers can't water them. He goes out of business. Lock away the natural resources by creating national parks. It shuts down the mines, and if they go out of business. Invent a spotted owl shortage and pretend it can't live in the forest where timber is cut. Shut off the forest. Then when no trees are cut, there's nothing to feed the mills, and there are no jobs, and they go out of business. Locking away lands cuts its tax base. Eventually the town dies. Keep it up, and there's nothing to keep the people on the land, so they head to the cities. The wilderness grows, just like Dave Foreman planned. It comes in many names and many programs: heritage areas, land management, wolf-bear reintroduction, rails to trails, conservation easements, and open space, and many more. Each of these programs is designed to make it just a little bit harder to live on the land, a little more expensive, a little more hopeless, literally herding people off of their land into designated human habitat areas, cities. In the West, where vast areas of open space make it easy to impose such policies, there are several programs underway to remove humans from the land. Today, there are at least 31 wildland projects underway, locking away more than 40% of the nation's land. The Alaska Wildlands Project seeks to lock away and control almost the entire state. In Washington State, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, parts of North and South Dakota, and parts of California, Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, Wyoming, Texas, Utah, and more. And there are at least 22 wildlands projects underway. For example, one project called Yukon to Yellowstone, or Y2Y, creates a 2,000-mile no-man's land corridor from the Arctic to Yellowstone. East of the Mississippi, there's at least 9 wildland projects covering Maine, Pennsylvania, New York, West Virginia, Ohio, Virginia, Tennessee, North and South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. Watch for the names of wildlands projects like Chesapeake Bay Watershed, Appalachian Restoration Project, and Piedmont Wildlands Project. I think I'm going to end that here, and you guys can look forward to my video tomorrow, beginning with how did we get here. I appreciate your listening, and I hope that you share this video. This is about Agenda 21. If you're interested in the event, the author of this book will be speaking around Idaho the week of October 16th through the 19th. So if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you.